Welcome to That Annuity Show, the podcast that will make you an expert in explaining annuities to your clients. Give us 30 minutes each week and we'll shave hours from your client presentations. Now, here's your host, Paul Tyler.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. And we lost Will, but we have our two regular co-hosts at the end of the day, Ramsey Smith. Ramsey, how are you?
Fantastic. Great to be here.
Mark Fitzgerald, how are you?
Great. How are you, Paul?
Good. And we have a really interesting guest today. Mark, I'm going to give you the honors of introducing our guest.
Sure, thank you. Well, today we have Lindsay Goldwert on with us. She has a very interesting background, started off in journalism, doing from breaking news to financial topics. I think also had a career at one point doing stand-up comedy and has done several podcasts that were in the top 100 with Apple. And then also wrote a book called Lessons from a Dominatrix, which I think has a lot of interesting plays that we can tie into the financial world. So with that,
did you say tie into, Mark?
Very well played. Very well played.
This will be our highest rated episode yet.
So with that, let me pass it over to Lindsay. Lindsay, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into writing the book, and things you learned from that.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Lindsay Goldwert. I'm a writer. I live in New York City. And again, my background was in women's magazines, breaking news, and I ended up transitioning my career into fintech. I worked at Capital, which is a startup, a savings startup, which has recently pivoted to investing. And then I worked at Stash, which is another investment app, and I was their editorial director. And I found this really interesting niche for myself, writing very consumer-facing financial content for liberal arts majors and for people who never learned about that thing in school. Financial topics are very intimidating for people. Money is a taboo topic. It will always be very similar to sex. You know, we don't learn about these things in school. And then we go into the world with a lot of the wrong ideas and a lot of fears that we never get resolved. And I had this crazy idea back in 2018 to interview professional dominatrixes about being assertive, about having confidence, and about setting roles and boundaries in our, not just in our personal lives, but also in at work and with our families. And people have a lot of misconceptions about what these women are like. They were actually incredibly intelligent, empathetic, and had a lot of real insights about power and power dynamics, not in a cruel way or a controlling way, but just in a really human way, just to help you start conversations that are tough ones. So it may seem like an unorthodox place to start, but it was an incredibly exciting experience, the most fun reporting project I've ever done. It changed my life and the way I approach conversations with my husband and conversations at work.
That's great.
What was that first conversation like?
Which one, my first work conversation or my first
work, husband, etc.? How did you, right? So after having sort of had an existing relationship in all those venues, how did you take what you learned about, assertiveness from this process? How'd you bring that into those relationships? It's one thing to start out that way. It's nothing to come in sort of mid-relationship and try to sort of push that kind of change.
That's the hardest one. There's a whole chapter about that in the book, about how do you start a conversation with somebody you've been with for 10 years, 20 years, when things have been going a certain way. How do you tell someone that you want some kind of a change, whether it's I want to move to a new city, or I've never been happy doing this one sort of thing, or I want to change my career, whatever it is. It could be a tough conversation if a person thinks that you've been happy doing things one way, but secretly you haven't been. They gave some really good advice. Always have these kinds of conversations, have it over dinner, have it over a glass of wine. Don't have intense conversations in bed, no matter what kind of conversations they are, because that's a time where people are sleepy, people are vulnerable. You might not have their best attention. So that was one thought. On a personal note, I've been with my husband for like 16 years, married for 10, my goodness. And we had to have some real conversations about where things were going. We don't have children. Our careers are changing. He is thinking about maybe moving to another city. I'm not ready. So we really had to have this real clean slate sit down and just say, and just admit to each other that, we have changed. The things we wanted when we were 25 are not the things we want when we're 40. And just say, like, I know you love me and I love you, and no one's going to run away or end the marriage over these things, which really aren't such a big deal. But by putting out there that you're nervous and scared, and you're scared what the other person's going to say, but you love the person with your whole heart, you just begin there. And you can even write it down, like make a list, like approach it like you'd be approaching, your manager at work, and just say, I know we used to do this. We used to go on vacation to this place, or we used to do this, in our personal lives, but I'd like to try something a little different, and don't use blame language. Like, you said you would do this and you never did this, or I hate it when you do this, or this seems really unfair. All these things are great. Just approach it in a more positive way. Like, I would really like it if we did this. I'd be more excited about the job, more excited about hanging out with you, if it was more like this, and here's why. And talk about the things you love about the person, or you love about the job, versus all the things you hate about the person or you hate about the job. And all these things lead to and then ask questions instead of just yes and no questions. Ask open-ended questions, because a lot of people aren't great communicators. They aren't born that way. So by approaching in this really gentle, positive way, where the person doesn't feel on the spot having to react to you right away, is a really great way to talk about any topic. So we talk like that all the time now. It's not easy. Sometimes he wants to run away, but who doesn't want to run away sometimes?
Well, so kind of flipping to finance. You mentioned finance is like one of those subjects where, like, yeah, how much do you make for a living? Oh, I don't.
Yeah.
I can see a lot of different conversations, and I'll come back because we've had some. We've got an app of ourselves. We put out. We've had some interest. I've been on live chat with people. You can't make 85-year-olds at 11 o'clock at night. It's been kind of interesting, to say the least. But so, financial topic. Where if I'm an advisor and I get the book, or a couple ways to think. How do I have a conversation with you? But then frequently, I may be talking to you, but really your husband is involved in the conversation. I may not even be there. Where do you think, if I'm an advisor, if I took the lessons, where should I start? Which conversation is the one I should start to sort of rethink how I may have a conversation?
This sounds pretty basic, but I would always start any conversation with, how are you today? Because sometimes when you start, people might have all what they want to talk about in front of them on a list, but by asking them something kind of open-ended like that, they might start talking about something that isn't on the list. They might say, well, actually, this year has been really hard. My husband was furloughed. My hours are cut back. The kids are home. I'm teaching the kids, so you might get a lot more insight into asking a question about how was your day, or how was your day today? How's your day going? And that's how you can really learn about somebody. And then that's something that you can, as you're creating a plan for them, you can make little notes like, husband was furloughed, he's looking to go back to work this year, so income is a little bit unsteady right now. You make these little notes for yourself, and you can really understand the person beyond just the facts and figures, which I think is the most important part of finance, which people don't talk about, which is we all have the spreadsheets in front of us, but it's about feelings and emotions are just as important as what's as facts and figures. And I think that's what a lot of people leave out, because you can't model for feelings, right? Like you can't put people in a box for, oh, this person, this woman at 55 is going to have these goals in mind. Like, you never know what people's goals are. And as time goes on, people's goals are changing. Fewer people are sharing their finances 100%. I work for Zeta, which is a company that does combined finances for couples, and their motto is yours, mine, and ours. Like, you can streamline some of your finances together with a joint account, but Gen Z and millennials are not interested in joining all their finances together. So, and some people want to maintain independence, which is more my model of things, and everything is personal. You might want to, so I think that what I would say is, don't assume anything. Never assume that people's finances are being paid out of a joint account. Never assume that people want children. Never assume anything. So I think just in your questionnaire, just ask a lot of open-ended questions about their goals. Don't assume their goals. Don't assume that they want to send their kids to college. Don't assume they want to move to a house. So that would be my best advice, is to ask a lot of open-ended questions about their goals and values versus just their savings goals and their savings, what they want to do with their money.
Yeah, I think back to another episode we had, remember, with Norm Trainer. How do you feel today? Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too is getting a bit more granular, right? Like if you ask, everybody wants to retire, everybody wants to be happy, everybody wants to have money, but what does that really mean? So I
Yeah.
think, defining it up front and having that conversation with open-ended questions allows you to get what's important to them.
Absolutely. It's all about your values, and the things that are important to you. This is sort of a funny analogy, but when we got married, we had a budget, and it was sort of a small wedding, and we decided that we could only have three things. We could each only have three things, and we decided I wanted a dress, I wanted someone to take pretty pictures, and I wanted, what else did I want? And I didn't want anyone to get into any fights. And my husband said, no big weddings, good food, and we get out of there as quick as possible and go on our honeymoon. And because we had those things, we were able to have the wedding we wanted, even though we didn't have dancing, we didn't have a ton of other stuff. And I think that because it was a wedding that was aligned with our values versus just our budget, because we could have crammed a lot of stuff in there on the budget that we had. And I think that by talking to clients or whoever about what's important to you, what kind of life do you want to have when you retire? And because people say, I want $1 million to retire on. So what are you going to do with that money? People don't even have, they just think that, people tell them you must have this much money to retire. It's like, well, yeah, but do you want to travel around the world? Do you want to live in one place and go fishing every day? Do you want to travel? Like, do you want to, just get an RV and explore the country, which my friends' parents are doing, So I think just not just getting them to their savings goal, but getting them to their emotional, helping them save according to their values. It will get them more excited to save. That's the other thing too. I worked with Dan Ariely, the economist, the behavioral economist, when I was at Capital, and he was such a life-changing person to work with, because his thing was, if you put a photo of your goal next to the goal, you can visualize the goal. And it gets you more excited to save for it. Like if you put like emergency fund, who cares? But if you put,
Right.
because you're more likely to pilfer from it, because there's no emotional attachment to it, only negative stuff like, oh no, one day I'm going to need this. But if you put like a house by the sea, or a cruise or a ship, suddenly that's something exciting to save for. Suddenly that's like it's like a vision board, but in a way that you could be like, oh, this is what I'm saving for. This is the goal, and it feels good to save for it.
Yeah, we're actually planning it. We just did we did a bunch of surveys and found that we asked a bunch of people in retirement. So how do you want to hear about retirement issues? Podcasts, say we can do podcast, video. It was funny. Online courses came up really high, so we made a big bet on online courses. We just did one kind of like borrowing straight off his work to say, well, could we get people to use Pinterest as a vision board?
Yes.
So we're starting to run that out over the next month. A big believer in this. I'm wondering, the other one we're, playing around with are the VR, right? We had a really pretty good experience, recruiting actuaries at the job fair. They were all over this stuff.
Sure.
Where does that, where does some of this new technology play? Like you've got a real interesting, you're working with a real interesting site. You're looking at leading technologies. I mean, what will get people over that next, sort of divide here to say, I see what the future, I see a positive future for myself?
That's a really good question. So at Zeta, so I'm the editor-in-chief of Money Date, which is their Love and Money section, their online Love and Money magazine. And we are definitely exploring Pinterest. People create Pinterest to create a vision for themselves, a vision for their bathrooms, a vision. So they don't just make a list like subway tile, but you actually
Right.
see what subway tile looks like, and it gets you more excited for remodeling your home, which is a very stressful thing to do. But by visualizing, you get this idea of what you want. And I think that why Pinterest is very powerful is that you can actually show a couple doing the thing that you want to do, if it's an image, and you can put your lessons over it, and it'll give them a more direct feel about what it would look like if they did take your advice. And a lot of advice is pretty sensible. Some advice is not sensible, where my point of view is very much, I call it like a Weight Watchers point of view, which is progress, not perfection, consistency over time versus get rich quick, versus the keto approach is like, you will lose 30 pounds in 30 days, then you will probably gain it back, but you'll feel good right now. And I think that when it comes to visualizing something, there's a way to be sensible about it. Like you don't have to show like a yacht or show, because that could be aspirational. People want that, but there's also trying to, and the most important thing is to know your customers and know where they're looking. We know that at Zeta, we know that a lot of women make the financial decisions in the family. So we want to do and Pinterest is more of a female-friendly social media platform.
I think
So
what say like 80% of the stats that I've seen that we're experimenting.
yeah.
I think what 75% of the users are women, right, on Pinterest.
Yeah, I mean, women are often the CFOs of the family, you know, and we want them, and they're often, you know, their spouses or their partners are often a part of that, but they're the ones who are starting these conversations. So the reason why we're pursuing Pinterest a little more seriously is that we want them to start to visualize what they want to do with their partners. And we want to listen to them. You know, we're doing a lot of user research and really asking, you know, what do you want to see? What do you want us to write about? Which is, because of course we have our own ideas of what we think people want to read. You know, I'm a very creative, wacky person, but sometimes people want the answers to certain questions. They want to know not just how to budget, but what to budget for. What is a shared expense? Are all shared expenses the same? What if I'm happy paying for my own cable because I watch all my shows and he watches all his shows? Do I have to pay for his ESPN? Do I have to pay? And the answer is, you guys choose, you know, but it's the conversations that matter, not the spreadsheets. That's my mantra, because you can make the spreadsheet after the conversation.
Exactly.
I had a quick question about this idea of trying to create some visual around the goals. I think is very compelling. I've always sort of struggled with how do you make that work? Like, is it when you sign into your account, whatever your account happens to be, that instead of it just being an account with, you know, your account value and everything else, there's actually your goals are represented photographically there as well? Like, is it literally an integration of Pinterest with whatever your financial account is?
I think Wealthfront does something where you can actually show the house you want to save for. And I don't know if it's the exact house. I mean, maybe it is the exact house, but eventually, like 10 years later, that house might not be on the market anymore. But I think the more you can show the thing that you're saving for, the more excited you'll be to put that money toward it. And I think if you have an app or you have something, there's a way to a very simple photo integration you can do. If it's just a house on a beach, you can find a photo image of that and just put that there. It doesn't have to be some super, you know, you don't have to have like a partnership with Zillow to show the house, you know, because again, that house may get sold and then you'll feel bad. You can't get it, you know? So I think by showing, you know, a picture, you can upload a picture of you on the beach with your grandchildren, or you playing golf, or you know, or a person on a hammock. You know, mine would be something like, honestly, like it would just be a beautiful desk and a place to write that's really quiet next to the ocean. That's my retirement goal. And and even though that can be anywhere, that's the goal for me. And if I could show that picture, like, oh, that's what I want to get. I can just write for myself and just do that. That's my dream.
Yeah, Chase is running a real interesting campaign. And it's exactly on this psychology, which is, I think it's, because I see it in the boards. It's like, what are you saving for? And they have a bike and they have a car. Now, somebody came to us with a, you know, interesting product idea. You know, get a lot of them. You know, annuities. Nobody knows what an annuity is. Here's a whole other topic, right?
Sure.
Okay, beauty of annuities, right? It's not an annuity. It's like we can create some guaranteed stream of income that can be, you know, because we're collectively pooling mortality. We can outperform a bond manager forever, right? It's people don't quite understand how this works. Well, what if we sort of said, hey, look, here's your BMW, you know, Mark, you'll love this idea. The BMW subscription, buy an annuity from us and you'll get the annuity, you'll get a new BMW every year. Okay. That's good for about like this many people, right? The more mundane, you know, when you look at sort of like most people, God, just pay for your healthcare, right? People don't forget that healthcare is going to be $6,000 per individual in a household to begin with, right? Mark, did I get the number about right? It's $6,000 for Medicare, right? Okay, for annuities today, okay, Lindsay, you know, if you were going to retire 10 years from now and you want to pay it, okay, maybe that's $80,000 to $100,000 in annuity. Kind of mundane, you know, given what you know, would, you know, go back to dominatrix, you know, okay, Paul, I'll pay for your checkups if you do the following. Do people respond to stuff that's like, it's necessary, but it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm inspired to pay my Medicare off today? I mean, how is,
When I wrote about annuities for good housekeeping, and I had to do a very, very basic explainer about it. So I had to go in and learn about it. And in order for me to write something, I have to be like, well, would I use this? Like, how would I use it? So I really try to put myself in the place of the reader. And to me, the thing I think about, because, I don't know, I'm not worry based, I'm not fear based, but I think about, okay, like what if I have my Social Security, I have a little bit of, I have my IRA, hopefully, everything will go as planned. I'll get my distributions, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, like what if a parent gets sick? What if I have to travel to be with a parent? What if something really, there's all this extra stuff that comes up, which is not sexy to talk about. And that's the thing. How do you tell someone, how do you Pinterest something unsexy? It's true. How do you Pinterest worry? And you could spin it as peace of mind, but there is something to be said about it, and that's the challenge, is how do you make someone excited to have enough money in case something goes wrong. Like say I'm getting, just to say I have $2,000, I'm just making this up, $2,000 to spend every month, to pay for my rent, whatever, that's my income post-retirement. If you say like, well, if you get this annuity or this financial product, you'll always have this extra $1,000 a month. Like you'll always have it. And then you can, and then God, I'm Jewish, like God forbid, something comes up, and you don't even have to make it a bad thing, but something unexpected comes up. You'll always be safe. You'll always have that thing. You'll never have to freak out. And I think that's the thing, is talking about mitigating catastrophe, which is hard to. That's why I'm a big believer in humor, because that's the only way to talk about horrible things, is to kind of laugh about it, and that's why comedy is such an important thing. Of course, there's a line not many people want to talk about, joke about cancer and your parents dying, or nursing home care. But there's a lot of people who have gone through this with you. You're never alone. And I think just by talking about the fact, like, you're not the only person with this problem, X amount of people have used this money for XYZ, and they were really relieved because it could have been worse. They could have had to sell the family home. They could have had to do this. So I think, using a little bit of humor, carefully, and just telling people some data about how other people use the product so they don't feel alone, and try to figure out what to do with it, I think would be very helpful.
I think too, what Paul mentioned before, something being necessary. I think there's a big difference between what's a necessity and what's necessary. So from one person's perspective, something that's necessary might be a golf membership. Now the necessities would be covering their expenses for housing, for food, for healthcare. But a necessary thing to them could be, maintain that membership for their mental health. So a lot of things is really defining what it is to that person. Paul joked, about the car. He knows I'm a car guy. So, for me, that might be something that is necessary. So it's different for everybody.
But it's also like, it's if you align it with your values, like your value isn't the car. Your value is adventure, going, seizing life, going places you want to go in style, right? That could be your value. That's something that makes you really happy. And so that's something easier to manage for more people than just like, get this BMW, because it's not just about the car. You don't just sit and look at it in your garage. I'm sure you drive it and it makes you feel good.
Oh, I want to be young. I'm going to be young forever with that, M3, right?
Yes.
Whatever it is, right?
And because it feels good, and there's no shame, there's no shame in most things, for goodness sake. But I think that's a way, if you wanted to talk about stuff, it doesn't have to be so product oriented. It's feeling oriented, And then so in your retirement, it's like, I always want to drive a nice car. There's nothing, my grandfather always wanted to drive a nice car. He didn't have any money. He grew up very poor. Both my grandparents grew up very poor. And the end of their life, they wanted a decent car to drive around in. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it symbolized having come such a long way, So, and it wasn't like a Rolls Royce, for goodness sake. So there's just, by thinking about where you've come and what you want and how it gives you peace of mind. And, that's more of a way than to just, the car or the house.
Without a doubt. So I guess from an advice standpoint, what do you think, like the biggest mistakes that advisors make and agents make in engaging in conversations, and what recommendations would you have to overcome those challenges?
I think the question is, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, but it's really important to be a good listener and to let them talk. And again, don't assume anything about them. Don't assume because, he came from a corporate life. He was like a hedge fund manager, and she was, or she was a hedge fund manager. Just don't assume that they want a retirement or any kind of end of life experience like anybody else. And I would ask them, who is there anyone's life you admire? How did your parents retire? Did they have a good experience? What about the way that, I'm a big believer in tell me about your family and I'll tell you about your finances. Like I would want to know how they were raised, how that experience went. Did their parents, if they are alive, how did they die? Like, what scared you about that? What do you want to emulate? What are your cautionary tales? Like, what are you afraid of? And in an emotional level, and I think that will open up a lot more stories and give you a lot more insight into, just because they might be parroting back what they've seen in Forbes or parroting back what they've seen on TV, on CNBC. But suddenly they might start to realize, like, what, actually, I don't really want a big house, for all my grandchildren to come visit. Actually, I want, we want a smaller house and to have more room for us to travel. Like I hadn't thought about it that way. So I think that also creates a little bit of trust too, to have an advisor who's really not just setting up the plan, but really understands where you're going. And I also think that an advisor should also ask them, have a check-in, like, how are we still feeling with our goals? Do you still want this house? Do you still want this golf membership? And he could say, now that I think about it, I have this knee injury and maybe I could allocate that money better. And he'd be, well, what do you want to do? It's like, well, my wife now, she really wants to go back to school. She wants to go to art school. And suddenly just never assume that people's goals are going to stay the same, even as they get older. Because people think if you're retired, just going to become a retired person. But your life changes after retirement too. It's like your act 3, So don't let people lock themselves into one retirement plan. Because I know from what I've heard, a lot of people who retire, especially men, aren't as happy as they thought in retirement. Not because of the money, but because the thing they wanted wasn't the thing they wanted. How many days can you go fishing? Maybe there's something broader in what they want. So I would say check in on their feelings and how they're doing every year, every 6 months, and just ask them what's changed. Ask them what's changing. You're not their therapist by any way, but just be a really good listener and keep checking on their feelings, not just their portfolio.
I mean, it's really interesting because I think all of us agree with everything you said. And, as I think about it, it's not just about having empathetic skills in the advisor community. It's about having empathetic personalities. And it strikes me that you can't just look for people that have financial skills to provide financial advice. You need people that have these skills of empathy. Sometimes those things can be co-located in the same person. Sometimes you have to have a team, but those two things are super, super important.
Think about a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your favorite doctor might not necessarily be the one who's like the best skilled, the best diagnostician. You want your doctor to listen to you. You want your doctors to ask, like, so how the kids, how's your marriage going? How are you feeling? How's work going? Asking how work is going will tell you a lot about how they're feeling, and doctors have to be trained in empathy. They have to be trained to ask these questions, especially because the doctors have so much less time to see their patients. So how do you diagnose your patient and ask them about all these things? And, there are some practices that are really trying to figure that out, to try to get the holistic approach, because not all doctors, if they're not so great with feelings, that's just sort of the truth, so it's not just advisors who are like, oh great, now I have to become I have to be a great empathist, is that the word? In all professions, you have to have a little more sense of feelings and a little more people skills.
So it sort of brings me sort of back to where you started out in where it was really about people advocating for themselves. And as I think about this, in a perfect world, advisors are one, being empathetic, and two, sort of stating what's important to them, and customers are doing the same. And frankly, a lot of unnecessary conversations could be saved. There could be a lot more efficiency. That's obviously a hard thing to get to, but wouldn't it be great if customers were trained to come into those conversations and say, I want this, I want that, and they were very clear on that. Again, going back to where you started with the goals of your book, I think that would create efficiencies for everybody in the process.
Absolutely. One of the things in the book, when, not to get too saucy, I'm not sure about your listenership, but, when a dominatrix sees someone, they have to have this real sit down beforehand, because it's definitely kind of fantasy play acting in a way, but everyone has to agree on what's going to happen, because in terms of the cost, like, what want this might be more money, how much, I never want to hurt you. Everything has to be consensual. Everyone has to feel the same way going in and going out, and everything has to be agreed on and like almost written down. So everyone goes in with the same expectations. If a person's like, well, how about this? It's like, no, we didn't agree on that. And that's true for a job. If you agree to a job with a certain job description and suddenly your boss is like, oh, can you pick up my dry cleaning? It's like, no, we didn't agree to that. That really sucks,
So
what is the safe word? I'm like, what is
that's what I'm asking you.
In a financial advisor?
Yes, it means HR. No, I'm kidding.
We have the title for the podcast, Ramsey. Yeah. When it comes to retirement planning, what's your safe word?
Yeah.
Always. You need one for everything. You really
don't put my name on it.
Mark, do you have one?
It's about negotiation, consent, and agreeing to rules, and that's true for everything, because anyone can feel walked over. If an advisor or anyone makes a decision without telling, it's like, oh, I readjusted your portfolio for you, or oh, I thought this product would be good for you. It's like, you can't do that. That's gross, because he might think he knows more than you do. So I think if you guys said, this is what I can do for you, this is what I cannot do for you, this is like straight up, so they have like something to refer back to. It's very important to have something to refer back to, because then if they get in touch with you, in the middle of your day and want questions, and you can say to them, I got your email, thank you so much, I can get back to you this week. And it's really hard to manage a difficult customer, because it's a business, and you want to make sure you don't want them to take off. And sometimes you just can't, you can't retain a customer that's too difficult. I mean, that's true. Then you have to make that decision, like, gosh, is this person really worth my time? If they're taking up my time and they're not paying me for this time. So how much can you give them? How many hours can you give them off the clock? What will you do? And then you have to figure out if that person is worth working, because it's your time. It's their time, but it's your time too, because you want to be the best and the most excited to work with them. You want to be the best partnership. And by putting all that up front, putting all those expectations up front, and if he says, well, I need to talk to you whenever I want, I'm a super nervous person, you have to say, well, this is how I work. It's very calming to have someone tell you what to do. In some ways, everyone wants to be taken care of, especially by someone who might know more than them. So don't be afraid. Don't just assume that you have to be everything to everybody to retain your business, which is very hard to do, because we all need to make money. And these are uncertain times. We might want to just go the extra mile for someone to retain someone. And that's where things get dicey. And that's when you have to say to yourself, okay, for this one person, I will do this. But but for nobody else, you have to write down rules for yourself and rules for your sanity. And that's where things get sticky, because, when your finances are your sanity, you can get mixed up on the things that will make you insane in the long term and the short term.
All right. Hey, this is tremendous. So I guess,
I'm so glad.
Yeah. And Mark, any last questions, thoughts?
No, I mean, I think the key is obviously putting a plan and structure in place, as we've talked about many times on the show, and, tying it back in, don't tap out in retirement. You don't want to have to find yourself hitting that unexpected point. So I think it's critical.
Don't hit that.
That's my biggest fear. Point. That's my biggest fear is it's very hard to get long-term insurance these days. It's going to be our retirements going to be very different than our parents' retirements. It's very hard to talk to people under 50 about retirement. My generation before us, they can't imagine ever retiring. All these products seem ludicrous to them because of student loan debt and all these things. And I think that adjusting conversations to this generation of people who are in their 40s and 50s are going to be different than the ones 20 years ago. So I think, just being a good listener, keeping up with what people are actually worried about, and just, and putting your expectations up front and telling them to put their expectations up front at the very beginning. I think that, and tell them, just be a safe place to talk to, and just tell them, don't be afraid to ask them what they're afraid of.
I just wanted to say one thing. I was also sort of rewinding to what you expressed as your image of retirement. It was really about an activity, not about something material. It was about a place where you engage in an activity that gives you pleasure, which is writing, which in many ways is much more sort of substantive than, a yacht, a beach, a house, what have you. And it's not, it's more achievable than many of those other things might be. I'm always struck by, there's a famous asset manager that says, if you have $500,000 or more, call me. And it's attached to a picture of a $50 million yacht. I thought, that doesn't make any sense.
That's exactly it. It's exactly it.
So I thought that was a very, very poignant image for me about, of a healthy way for retirees to really think about what's actually important. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. And I would like to see the ocean. That would be nice, or be near the ocean. But yeah, it's just, it's an activity and it's a feeling. And at the same time, I also would want that flexibility, you know, in case something goes wrong, to have enough money to get on a plane and go somewhere and help someone. That is part of who I am. Is I always want to be mobile. Also, my retirement is I need to be near my friends. That's really important to me too. So I have a vision of laughing with my friends on like a porch swing. I don't care what the porch swing is really, but I just have this image of laughing with my friends as we get old. My friends from high school, we all want to retire together, and then having this real quiet time to write all day. And I see my husband in the garden in the back, you know. And these are not things that would cost $1 million, but it's all I want. That's what I want.
Yeah. Well, hey, Lindsay, thanks so much for your time. Now, where do we find your book? Should we follow you on your website? Tell how do people get in touch or follow your writings and work?
Thank you so much. Yes, you can find me at lindsaygoldwert.com. You can find me on Twitter. I have a little bit of a wacky Twitter feed, but and that's Lindsay Goldwert, just on Twitter. And yeah, the book is called Bow Down: Lessons from Dominatrixes and How to Get Everything You Want. There's a paperback coming out in January, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, you can find me anywhere. And I'm also the editor-in-chief of Zeta. So if you ever wanted, you can also find me there. I'm everywhere. And I love to hear from people. And I love to talk to different people, different groups. And so please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. All right. Hey, listen, thanks so much. And thanks for joining us on the show. And please like us, subscribe to us, tell your friends. And we'll be back again next week with another great episode of That Annuity Show.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com.